All right, let's jump right in. Have you ever actually thought about your workplace through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? It's kind of fascinating. At our absolute core, we're all just driven to satisfy these fundamental unmet needs, right? For most of us, a full-time job is supposed to cover the absolute basics, those physiological and safety levels. We're talking about earning enough to feed, house, and clothe our families, plus having a safe place to work and knowing our job is actually secure. But, well, here's where the friction kicks in. Companies, they have needs too. To survive, to thrive, a business literally has to satisfy its owners and stakeholders, which fundamentally means making a profit. Now, sometimes these two sets of needs match up perfectly, but a lot of the time, it's a massive tug-of-war between employees pushing for fair pay and employers pulling for cost efficiency.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the exact mechanics of that very conflict. Think of us as neutral sportscasters here, decoding this endless labor management tug-of-war. We're going to look at exactly how this built-in tension gets managed, the structures workers actually use to amplify their voices, and the really high-stakes tactics both sides bring out when negotiations just completely break down.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, why workers join unions. Second, the union structure itself. Third, the bargaining table. Fourth, what happens when negotiations break down, and finally, the future of unions. Let's get into it.
Starting with Section 1, Why Workers Join Unions, and a look at their rise and decline.
So, what actually is a labor union? Simply put, it's an organized group of workers that bargains collectively with employers. The whole goal is to improve the exact things we just talked about: pay, job security, and working conditions. You know, in a totally non-union environment, an employer pretty much makes one-sided decisions on salaries and benefits. But a union? It completely flips that dynamic, letting employees bargain together as one massive unified front.
But how big is this unified front today? Take a look at this number, 10.3%. Honestly, despite the incredible power they held historically, the union membership rate in the U.S. has been on a steady downward slide for decades. To put that in perspective, back in 1983, the membership rate was sitting at 20.1%. That's nearly 18 million workers. But fast forward to 2021, and that rate basically got cut in half, dropping down to just 10.3%, or roughly 14 million people.
And if we look at where that remaining 10.3% actually works today, there is a staggering divide. Right now, 36% of public sector workers, we're talking teachers, police officers, firefighters, are union members. But in the private sector, that number absolutely plummets to just 7%. So why such a dramatic drop on the private side? Well, it really boils down to macroeconomics. Over time, the U.S. shifted away from a manufacturing-based economy, which had these huge, easily organized factories, to a service-based economy filled with tons of smaller firms. Throw in periods of economic uncertainty where workers might be a little scared to rock the boat, and organizing private companies gets significantly harder.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the union structure, or how they actually build the pyramid.
Once workers actually decide to unionize, these organizations operate in a highly structured, pyramid-like way. It's actually a lot like the huge corporations they negotiate with. At the very bottom, the foundation, in Step 1, you have the locals. These serve a specific geographic area. This is where you find your shop stewards. These are everyday workers who basically act as the go-betweens for daily on-the-ground disputes with supervisors. Now move up to Step 2, and those locals are grouped into national unions. These national bodies are the ones organizing new locals and negotiating massive contracts for entire industries. Finally, at the very peak in Step 3, you've got these gigantic labor federations like the AFL-CIO. And they aren't just negotiating, they are essentially a massive political engine, lobbying the government on sweeping issues that affect organized labor as a whole.
Which brings us to Section 3, the bargaining table, and the art of collective bargaining.
Okay, picture this. Union workers operate on a contract, usually lasting a few years. When it's time to renew, union reps and management sit down face to face. The union says, here's what we want. Management says, here's what we can give, and they hash it out. But what happens when talks hit an absolute brick wall? Well, one option is mediation. They bring in a totally impartial outside expert to look at the mess and make some recommendations. But, and this is a huge but, a mediator's advice is completely non-binding. Literally, either side can just listen to the recommendation, say no thanks, and walk right out the door.
Now, if mediation fails, or if everyone just wants a guaranteed, definitive end to the drama, they might go with arbitration. The absolute key word to remember here is binding. In arbitration, a third party comes in, studies the situation, and dictates a final agreement. Whatever the arbitrator decides, that's it. Full stop. Both the union and the management have to agree ahead of time that they will legally abide by whatever the arbitrator says. So, as you can imagine, it is a much more high-stakes final decision.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, when negotiations break down. This is where we look at the extreme tactics of this tug of war.
So, the rope just snapped. Negotiations completely failed. Let's objectively look at the offensive plays unions can run. First up is the most famous one, striking. This is literally when workers walk away from their jobs and just refuse to come back, completely bringing production to a halt until they get a deal. Second is picketing. We've all seen this, right? Workers parading outside a building with signs. It's meant to inform the public about unacceptable management practices, but it also physically disrupts the business because other union workers usually refuse to cross that picket line. And third, there's boycotting. This is where the union actively tells its members and the general public to just stop buying the company's products altogether. It is a direct hit to the company's wallet.
To give you an idea of how disruptive this gets in the real world, check out these examples. Back in the fall of 2003, 4,000 dining room workers at Yale University went on strike to demand better pension plans. For 23 days, students were literally left scrambling to find food at local mini-markets until the workers got their deal. Or take the University of Hawaii in 2001. Faculty members were furious over salaries, so they went on strike and picketed for 13 days straight. And sure, some students probably just went to the beach, but graduating seniors, they were in an absolute panic, terrified they wouldn't get the credits they needed to graduate on time.
And boycotts can be just as fascinating. In 2003, the AFL-CIO actually put the touring show of the Broadway musical Miss Saigon on its national Don't Buy or Patronize list. Why? Well, they were definitely upset about the show paying low wages to non-union performers. But the really wild part, they were heavily protesting the use of a virtual orchestra. The producers were using this electronic software to generate the music, effectively replacing live union musicians entirely. Crazy, right? Now, management obviously doesn't just sit there and take it. They have their own defensive playbook to keep the business running and financially viable. Their main countermove is the lockout. This is exactly what it sounds like. They literally lock the workplace store so workers can't get inside and, crucially, can't earn a paycheck. Another really aggressive tactic is bringing in strike breakers. You might know them as replacement workers. These are non-union folks willing to cross the picket line, allowing the company to keep the lights on and the revenue flowing while the regular workers are protesting outside.
If you're a sports fan, you probably remember these management tactics vividly. In 2011, NFL owners and the Players Association were deadlocked fighting over how to split billions in revenue. So the owners imposed a massive 130-day lockout. They legally banned players from even using team practice facilities until they hammered out a deal literally right before the season started. And it didn't stop there. The very next year, in 2012, the NFL actually used strikebreakers. They brought in non-union replacement referees to keep the games on TV. And if you watched football that year, you know it led to some unbelievably chaotic and highly questionable calls on the field.
So stepping back for a second, why do managers fight unionization so incredibly hard in the first place? It basically comes down to three huge headaches for them. Number one, increased costs. Paying higher wages and better benefits means a company either has to accept lower profits, which shareholders hate, or raise prices, which makes them less competitive. Number two, reduced flexibility. The work rules negotiated by unions can make it incredibly tedious and difficult for a manager to fire or discipline a genuinely poor-performing employee. And number three, cumbersome processes. Dealing with formal union grievances is just a really long, time-consuming, and expensive administrative burden.
All right, that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the future of unions and what actually lies ahead.
So look, despite decades of declining numbers, organized labor is absolutely not waving the white flag here. Groups like the AFL-CIO are actually pretty optimistic. They point to recent membership bumps among women, immigrants, healthcare workers, graduate students, really trying to expand way beyond their traditional blue-collar manufacturing roots. But on the flip side, employers are getting a lot more sophisticated in how they avoid unions. To dodge those higher union costs, companies are leaning super heavily on part-time workers, using independent contractors, outsourcing jobs entirely, or making massive investments in AI and automation to just reduce the need for human labor altogether.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to close out today's explainer. As the modern workplace rapidly transforms into this highly digital, heavily automated landscape, will organized labor actually figure out how to adapt and capture these new service sectors? Or are employer strategies and automation ultimately going to win out in this endless tug of war? It is an absolutely fascinating dynamic to watch unfold. Thanks so much for joining me to explore the mechanics of labor relations today, and as always, keep learning.